Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Key AA Wash Process Kenya from Father's Coffee Roastery. And there's the bag right there. And Father's, based out of Ostrava, Czech Republic. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, mostly because there is a coffee shop nearby that carries their coffee pretty regularly. But in addition to that, we have had generally positive experiences with their coffees in the past. So when I saw this one on the shelves, it immediately caught my attention, as we're yet to review any of Father's Kenyan coffees. So it'll be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 40. And we did push the recipe a little bit on this one at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which typically indicates a more medium fine grind. However, with this one, we went a little bit more fine on that grind as well. Now, roast profile for this coffee. This one is listed as one of their filter offerings, and that generally indicates that it is on the lighter side of things. So this is a pretty light coffee, but once again, they're not necessarily quite as light as some of the ultra light or super light roasting coffee roasters in Europe, or even some of the more recent ones we've received from American-based coffee roasters. But even then, this is still generally a light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the cup was very much in line with the expectations we had for it, with plenty of Kenyan-like characteristics of red berry brightness and savoriness. The initial impression does yield slightly less sweetness and a little bit more intensity in the tart aspects, with slightly below average level of tomato-like savoriness to it as well. So once again, very much what you're expecting from a Kenyan coffee, everything you could be expecting from the Kenyan coffee, maybe a little less sweetness, maybe a little bit more intensity in terms of those currents, but for the most part, exactly what you would expect. Day 17 through the Chemex, and it is continuing to offer an abundance of Kenyan-like characteristics, with a slight bit more candied sweetness this time around. A bit more of the tomato-like aspect was present in the cool down, so mixed impressions on this second try. We move on to day 20 as we opted for the April brewer, and this was the best the cup had been to this point, as it was a little hard to differentiate too many unique characteristics relative to an average washed Kenyan so far. It does have that crisp, bright tart berry aspect right off brew, and a little bit more sweetness in the cool down with a little less savoriness, so that definitely helped with this brew method on this day. Day 23 through the V60 with some higher temperatures and a more fine grind. And I said, let's just try, let's push this one a little bit and see what we get from it. And it did improve a fair bit, as it was offering much more of that candied sweetness to the berry aspects this time around. Seems a little bit more toned down in terms of the savory aspects as well. So that second try that we had definitely yielded plenty of that tomato-like aspect. But from this point going forward, we've noticed significantly less of that as well. In addition to that, it is cleaner with the anticipated level of brightness. I mean, we are working with a Kenyan coffee, and we were definitely pushing this one a little bit, so we were definitely getting plenty more of those brighter characteristics to it as well. Day 26 through the Chemex, the same adjustments, and the cup is the best it has been to this point, with a little bit more of the candied sweetness to the berry aspects yet again. There's also a little bit more clarity as it continues to offer plenty of the brighter Kenyan aspects and a little less of the savory components, so those notes almost mirror the day 23 impressions that we had, as we just noticed that this coffee has generally improved with time. Day 29 through the V60 with the same adjustments, and it's another nice day. There's a little bit more candied sweetness, so once again, we're seeing incremental improvements on this coffee, which was a nice coffee to begin with, so seeing these slight improvements day by day definitely did help. Very similar to the day 23 impression, as it has been pretty consistent, offering very much the classic Kenyan profile, with slightly more cleanliness and sweetness to it overall. Day 32 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it is continuing to offer great consistency, as it's very straightforward, plenty of the notable candied sweetness to it, cleaner than a normal Kenyan coffee with a little less of the savory aspects, and that definitely seemed to help it on this day as well. Day 35, final notes that we do have through the V60, and it was very close on which brew method we preferred, mostly because of just how consistent this coffee was throughout the entirety of it. It continues to have plenty of the Kenyan aspects with those tart dark currants, red florality, high level of brightness, plenty of body and savoriness, nice clarity, and above average sweetness. So a little bit repetitive on these notes, mostly because this coffee was just very repetitive. It was something that you knew what you were going to get from it anytime you brewed it. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. So let's go through those, and we will start with let's start with the finish, level 4. And usually when I talk about the finish with Kenyan coffees, I like to discuss it alongside of the acidity, mostly because those are two things I've always said. When it comes to washed Kenyan coffees, something might have gone horribly wrong if neither of those are scoring at least at that level 4 mark. And that's the case with this one right here, as it definitely has plenty of the brighter tart aspects to it, and that's present within the finish. In addition to that, the savoriness is present, but once again, it's significantly more toned down. And given that one of the notes they have listed on here is the black tea, I could see the savoriness coming a little bit more in that sense as opposed to the tomato-like characteristics. As I mentioned on some of the earlier days when we maybe had this coffee a little bit more toned down, we were experiencing a little bit more of those tomato-like aspects coming through in the finish. Sweetness, level 4. And that's something that I kept going back to, mostly because it was the highlight of this coffee for me. A little bit more of the candied sweetness in terms of those berry aspects. So having that score at the level 4 is always a big win for me when it comes to Kenyan coffees, because that's not necessarily always the case when it comes to Kenyan coffees in general. Florality, level 4, plenty of the well-anticipated herbality to it, the floral herbality. So thinking plenty of that hibiscus-like characteristic, which continues to be an ever-present with a lot of the Kenyan coffees that we review in general. Berry fruit, level 4, those tart currants very much present within this one, right from the onset, present, consistent, prominent throughout the entirety of this one. Very much what you'd expect for a Kenyan coffee, and they do have that note list on here. I think they just have currants, and then I think they have gooseberry, which is another supposedly tart berry, so you're fully expecting plenty of those components within this one. Then we'll move on to the level 3s, and we'll start with the citrus fruit, level 3. So usually when it comes to Kenyan coffees, I'm also experiencing a little bit of that citric tone to it as well. And this one I would say is a little bit toned down relative to the majority of Kenyan coffees that we have, which does seem to help with the overall profile of it for me, because it does allow for a little bit more of a focus on the candied berry attributes of this one. Body, level 3. That's once again another expectation that we would have for a coffee like this, given that it is a Kenyan coffee, given that we brewed it with the V60, definitely expecting it to have that juicy body, which it very much did within this one. And then two final things worth discussing, and we will talk about them side by side, and that is the cleanliness at a level 4 and the savoriness at a level 2. So when I was making this tasting wheel, I was really thinking heavily about the black tea note that they had listed on here, and I said to myself, I can see it, but given that the tomato component is so toned down and even the black tea isn't quite as prominent and pronounced as the very well-defined and articulated berry components within it, I think I need to leave the savoriness at a level 2, though I could definitely see it maybe being a little higher on other days. But that coincides with the cleanliness being there at that level 4 mark, because I always say when it comes to Kenyan coffees, if you can kind of avoid that tomato-like aspect to it, then I will score this one at a level 4. That was the case with this coffee, as I wouldn't say that it was an ever-present component. For the majority of the time that I was working through this coffee, I couldn't necessarily feel that. There were traces of it from some earlier days and throughout the entirety of it, but even then it's significantly less prominent and more toned down than the majority of Kenyan coffees that we do have. So I was happy with that being there at that level 2 and the cleanliness being there at that level 4, because when it comes to Kenyan coffees, if you can get the cleanliness at the level 4 and the sweetness at a level 4 for me, then it's definitely a victory. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This is the way I described this coffee to somebody pretty recently, and I said that this is definitely on the slightly above average side of Kenyan coffees. A lot of people know I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Kenyan coffees, mostly because of the very strong savory tomato aspects that are present within a lot of them. But if they're done really well, then I can enjoy the coffee significantly more than I would for the majority of the time. And that was the case with this one right here, mostly because it did offer that above average clarity, above average sweetness, but that's kind of where this one finished. It was just a little bit above average for what I was expecting from a Kenyan coffee, which in itself is a victory. But as I'm kind of thinking through the Kenyan coffees that we've had in the past, most notably Kianjege, which still remains my favorite washed Kenyan coffee we've reviewed on this channel, and even the Key that we had from Jaku a couple of years ago, there are better Kenyans that I've enjoyed in the past. In addition to that, there are Key coffees I've enjoyed in the past a little bit more than this one, though this one was still nice, and it's one that I enjoyed drinking probably a little bit more than I was expecting, given that it is a Kenyan coffee. But that continues to go along the lines of what I've experienced with this coffee roaster in general, and it's that I generally have pretty positive feedback on the coffees that we do review from them. type of person I would suggest this coffee to. And if you do enjoy your Kenyan coffees, I mean, this is the first place I need to start, because this one has everything you'd expect from a Kenyan coffee. Plenty of the brighter, more body, more tart aspects, a little bit of the savoriness, all of those things in a slightly lighter profile. Once again, not necessarily the lightest coffee out there, but still lighter by most standards. Outside of that, you're experiencing a little bit more sweetness to it and just a little bit more clarity, as you do have some of those savory aspects toned down. Best direction I can point somebody towards for this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Key AA Wash Processed Kenya from Father's Coffee Roastery. Thank you for watching.